So I was able to beat New Game Plus 7 on all 3 rogue subclasses recently, and I just wanted to make a quick video to showcase the builds I used, while also going over what I found to work best on rogue in general. To start off with, between these 3 subclasses, I think when trying to beat the game for the first time, or on lower New Game Plus levels, all 3 are pretty great and all feel fun to play. With Demolition, you'll be dashing across floors, dropping bombs, and usually one-shotting everything, making their runs extremely fast. Blades does a ton of melee damage with its free weapon crit damage from its passive, and if you play dual daggers you can just dash through enemies, deleting them instantly. And finally, Poison is able to delete bosses including Avatar incredibly quickly with its shotgun fan of knives, while also being able to defeat large amounts of enemies at once by bringing them into your poison cloud. Once trying to push past New Game Plus 4 or 5, I would recommend either Blades or Poison, although both are pretty gear dependent and enchant dependent, with Blade for anybody wanting to play a weapon power build, and Poison for a spell power build. I was actually pleasantly surprised with how much damage I was able to do on my auto attacks with Blades, with it doing 6,000 damage per crit on Avatar in New Game Plus 7, which added up quickly due to Blade's high weapon speed. It also has really good survivability with Slice and Dice, giving a high parry rate, combined with Mortal Strike's Leech, which honestly made me feel immortal as the moment I took damage, I would gain it back insanely fast. The only downside is that you can't start the run with a Leech upgrade, so the beginning of the run is usually the most dangerous part, as you won't have any sustain other than HP regen and potions. Also, prior to me enchanting my gear properly, the damage was definitely lacking, but it was definitely nice to see a weapon fire build able to breeze through New Game Plus 7 once properly geared, since I've only been playing spell power builds recently, so it was a nice change of pace. Poison has insane damage scaling from its 50% poison damage passive. It is able to nuke bosses down incredibly fast, including Avatar. With its poison cloud, no ranged enemies are able to shoot you and are forced to enter the cloud, which ends up making for a very relaxed playstyle, as you are able to pull large amounts of enemies and they will all be forced to walk into your cloud, where you can shotgun them down, where they take massive damage from close range fan of knives, plus the cloud itself also doing really high damage as well. On top of that, while in the cloud, you also get a nice amount of evasion from the cloud upgrade, so survivability isn't an issue as well. The main downside to Poison is due to its scaling incredibly well with spell crit damage. You'll end up having to wear intelligence gear, and it also being pretty enchant reliant. Demolition, meanwhile, fell off incredibly hard past New Game Plus 6 for me. To start, it's incredibly reliant on getting the upgrade that drops a bomb when dashing near an enemy, which you can't pick from Magic Shop. Without that, your clear speed will be incredibly slow, and even with it, the boss damage is atrocious in higher New Game Plus levels. Beyond that, survivability is terrible, as you don't get any leech like Blades, or evasion like Poison, so if you don't have the damage to 1 or 2 shot the mobs, you'll usually end up taking quite a bit of damage, especially if you were unlucky with the dashing giving guaranteed evasion upgrade. On Avatar, it's especially noticeable, as since its only method of healing is potions, you have to play incredibly well, as the bombs do not have the damage to burst them down, so if you make too many mistakes, you'll most likely run out of potions and die. So starting off with the actual builds, we have Blades Rogue. For its skill point priority, I recommend leaving Fan of Knives at 1 point and then not putting any points into Flurry of Blades, because Rogue's ult pool is already pretty tough to get the upgrades you need, so I'd rather not add more to it. I then put 2 points into Slice and Dice and Mortal Strike, and then I would go ahead and work on maxing out Assassin and Sidestep. Once all those 2 are maxed out, I would max out both Mortal Strike and Slice and Dice, and then begin working on attuning trinkets. For these skill orb upgrades, I don't think it's the biggest deal what you grab for the Magic Shop. I tried to start with Phantasmal Strike, Hidden Cuts, and Lethal Opening on different runs, and didn't really notice a difference. Once in the run, however, the number 1 priority upgrade is Crimson Strike. If you don't get this upgrade, you will see your survivability be a bit rough. It is definitely possible to go through without it, as I had a run where I found mine all the way in court, but it's definitely day and night from when you do have it versus when you don't. Next on my priority is Lethal Opening, On the Move, and Blade Parry. Hidden Cuts and Phantasmal are nice to grab for clearing floors faster, but they don't do much for bossing. Now gear-wise, I recommend using Crushing dual daggers with the vulnerability suffix. I like dual daggers for the high attack speed, plus the dash does decent damage to pick off casters, and also allows me to traverse across floors quite quickly. I picked Crushing over Mighty as the majority of my damage is auto attacks, and found that Crushing buffed those more, and then Vulnerability is a must for the 20% damage bonus, since again most of my damage is from auto attacks, so it will be constantly applied. For the remaining enchants for prefixes, I recommend Physical Damage %, followed by dexterity, and then vitality. Physical damage percent buffs both your weapon's auto attacks as well as mortal strike, as they both have the physical tag. Since Assassin already gives 100% crit damage on top of dexterity, already giving a ton as well, the physical damage percent bonus ends up giving more damage. For suffixes, I like weapon speed, crit rate, boss damage, evasion, damage reduction, and then parry. Also currently, I use only one piece with Vitality for HP and HP regen, as well to meet the Vitality requirement to equip the cape, but I'll probably have to switch my boots over to a Vitality enchant as well, since when you don't have the Leech upgrade, that damage taken is definitely noticeable. Since I wear Vitality on my gear, I just dump my attributes into Dex. For food, I default to the Undead Damage Spread, though the food for dash recharge might be nice as well with the guaranteed evasion or upgrade. For drinks, I recommend the weapon speed, weapon crit rate, and the 20% damage drink. In terms of playstyle during the run, I use dual dagger skill to dash in, hit mortal strike for decent damage as well as the leech, and then just clean up whatever is left with auto attacks while making sure you focus down any ranged or caster enemies, as those will do the most damage to you as you cannot parry their attacks. For bosses, I just mortal strike to keep the leech active and then auto attack the rest of the way. I'm actually curious to see how far I can push with this build, since I only really see spell power builds doing really high New Game Plus levels, so we'll definitely put it to the test sometime in the future. Now onto Demolition Rogue. For its skill point priority, leave Fan of Knives at 1, and don't put any points into Slice and Dice or Flurry of Blades. I then recommend maxing out Grenades, Sidestep, and Harder Friendship Suit before moving on to attuning trinkets. For these skill upgrades, I like starting with Incendiary Grenades from the Magic Shop, as it helps to clean up anything the bomb doesn't one-shot at the beginning, as its fire pool does decent tick damage. Explosive Exit is also a must pick due to it allowing you to drop one bomb, then dash away and drop another bomb, which will both go off at around the same time, which usually deletes groups of enemies combined with Incendiary Pool until later New Game Plus levels. And then prioritize On the Move and Lethal Opening, with On the Move being your biggest source of survivability. Gear-wise, this build is actually quite complicated to set up, as the bomb skill is spell power and not weapon power. So early on, I would wear dex gear that you find that has keen or spell power, and that should still be enough to get past really early New Game Plus levels. Once you would be able to get 200 to 300 spell power from an intelligence gear, which would generally be from weapon, off-handed cape, having a high-level wizard also helps with the title bonus. I would then swap over to using intelligence gear completely while putting the majority of your points into intelligence. The part where it gets complicated is that since Dex is your primary stat for Rogue, you won't be able to get intelligence gear unless you put your points into intelligence, unless you have another character that has intelligence as their main stat. What you can do is put your points into intelligence and then do a few runs looking for the merchant shop in forest levels on your highest New Game Plus level, and then abandon and keep rerunning the forest. You should be able to get a full set of intelligence gear around your level within about 15 to 20 minutes. Once you do have the intelligence gear, I recommend a powerful dirk with vulnerability or destruction to help with more consistency, and then a tome and offhand with destruction as well. For prefixes, I recommend physical damage percent, followed by intelligence, and then spell power, and then vitality. I prioritize physical damage percent because the bomb scales really well with it on its initial explosive, as it has the physical tag. Doing this will not buff its incendiary grenade, however, so I'm not entirely 100% sure which is better in a full run, assuming you got all 3 upgrades for it. But early in the run, the physical damage percent is definitely better. For suffixes, cooldown reduction, followed by cast speed, followed by crit rate, and then etc. I wore 2 pieces of gear with focus in order to meet the focus requirement for cape, and then also wore a piece with vitality enchant, because I mentioned earlier I was really struggling with survivability on this build once the bombs were no longer strong enough to 1 or 2 shot enemies, and even more so on bosses. On top of wearing that, I still had about 30 additional points into vitality, because that alone wasn't enough to survive usually. The rest of my attributes I dumped into intelligence for the spell crit rate and crit damage. For food, I default to the dash reduction meal. For drinks, I recommend cooldown reduction, spell crit rate, and 20% damage drink. In terms of playstyle during the run, you just dash around floors dropping bombs. If you have the damage to kill the enemies in 1 or 2 bombs, it's really fast, but if you don't, then honestly this build feels pretty awful, as you'll have to keep dashing and then hope you get the upgrade to recharge your guaranteed evasion, otherwise you'll definitely notice survivability issues, which is why I think it's amazing for lower New Game Plus levels, but then falls off really hard. For bossing, it's still just dropping bombs and dashing around, making sure to play around the guaranteed evasion, as you have 0 sustain and can only rely on HP regen and potions. Finally, we have Poison Rogue. For its skill point priority, I don't put any points into Flurry of Blades or Slice and Dice. I'd recommend putting 2 points into Fan of Knives to help with its mana cost early on, and then max out Sidestep, Poison Mastery, and Toxic Cloud. I then max Fan of Knives, but consider upgrading it slowly if you find you are having to spam it a lot to help with mana issues before moving on to attuning trinkets. For these skill up upgrades, always start the run with Poison Knives in order for Fan of Knives to receive the bonus poison damage from the Poison Mastery passive. I then prioritize maxing out Poison Knives, Deadly Aim, Lethal Opening, On the Move, and Billowing Cloud. In terms of whether or not to grab Focus Throw, it upgrades the range by a large amount, but you have to get all of the upgrades for it to match the damage of using this skill normally at point blank range, so I prefer not to grab it, but you definitely can, you'll just have to spend a few orbs on it. If you don't take Focus Throw, taking Ricochet will also help with clearing out narrow corridors like in Dark Holes, but it's not that big of a priority to me. Now gear-wise, similar to Demolition, since both Fan of Knives and Poison Clouds scale off spell power and scale well with spell crit rate and crit damage, you'll end up having to use Intelligence gear. Once again, I recommend just using Dexterity gear with spell power stats on them that you find until you're able to get around 200 to 300 spell power on your Intelligence gear from Weapon, Offhand, and Cape. Wizard title also helps with this. Once you have Intelligence gear, since its Poison Mastery passive applies vulnerability on poison hits, you can actually wear any kind of one-handed intelligence weapon you want with Destruction for most spell crit rate. I'd still recommend Dirk, however, due to its parry helping a bit defensively. For prefixes, I recommend Poison Damage %, followed by Intelligence, and then Spell Power, and then Vitality. Poison Damage % scales incredibly well with the build, since both your Fan of Knives and Poison Cloud do poison damage. For suffixes, I think Cooldown Reduction, followed by Cast Speed, followed by Crit Rate, and then Mana Cost. I have 2 focus engines on my gear for the focus cape requirement, and 1 piece of Vitality just for the added HP and regen, which has honestly been great since poison deletes everything in seconds, including bosses, so only really traps ends up being what damages me. I then dump all of my points into Intelligence for more spell crit rate and crit damage. For food, I default to the Undead Damage Bread. For drinks, I recommend Poison Damage Drink, Crit Rate Drink, and then the 20% Damage Drink. If you would like even more damage, consider running the Sudden Death Drink for 50% spell damage over the 20% damage drink. You have to make sure to use Fan of Knives carefully so as to not empty your HP, as you're only healing with potions and regen. If you do run Sudden Death, I would also swap 1 or 2 enchants over to mana cost, as that will also reduce the life cost. In terms of playstyle during the run, I just drop Cloud, aggro the enemies with Fan of Knives, and then they will be forced to enter the Cloud with you, as they can't hit you with range attacks while you're inside of the Cloud. Once they enter the Cloud, you can shotgun them down, which would kill them quickly with Fan of Knives. Bosses are absolutely melted by this build, so I have no real tips other than watch your HP if you're using Sudden Death. Now, I did a poll recently with subscribers in order to decide which class you guys would like to see next, and you guys voted for Paladin, with it winning with 31% of the votes, so that's what the next video will be for. Anyways, thank you all for watching, and hope you have a good rest of your day.